Welcome to the podcast. My name is David. Let's save the world. Today, we're talking about cults. This is one of the first episodes that I dreamed up when I decided to do this show. I saw a movie called Midsommar, which is amazing. One of my very favorite movies from the last few years. And by the way, I'm going to give some spoilers about that movie. So if you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor and watch it and then come back. When that movie ended, I actually had tears in my eyes. I was happy for her. And I was overjoyed that she had found this family and had connected on that level, and she had burned away her previous problems, the life and the trauma that she had endured, and she had found her new home. And I was kind of surprised to find when I got out of the theater and was talking to my friends that I was the only one who thought it was a happy ending. So I'm not sure what that says about me, but it got me thinking into the mindset of cults and how someone gets indoctrinated into them and is willing to throw away the rest of their lives in order to be a part of this cult. And so I'm really excited to be talking about it today. In just a bit, I'll be speaking with cult mediation specialist Patrick Ryan, and we're going to learn a lot about cults from him. But first, 1BR is a new thriller about Sarah, who moves to Los Angeles to start a new life and lucks into a sweet one-bedroom apartment. Situated on a quiet street, it's got plenty of space, friendly tenants, and even a cute neighbor next door. But soon, Sarah learns she didn't choose this apartment. It chose her. With me here to talk about it is writer and director David Marmor. All right. Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm super stoked. This is a movie that was a bit under my radar, and then I saw it was out there and I was like, oh, wow, this is getting really good reviews. First-time feature director. I think RogerEbert.com had a good review for it.
Yeah, and they were really kind.
Yeah, so I was like, this is definitely a movie people should be checking out then, because wow, not very often a film in this genre can come out of nowhere and get that kind of a response. So I appreciate you speaking to me about it.
Of course, yeah, I'm thrilled. We've been sort of obviously really happy with the critical response and the audience response so far. So I'm just like, happy to get the word out there and appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Cool. So since this is your first feature and a lot of people may not know much about your past, I have this vision that you moved to Los Angeles from wherever you're from and immediately started getting hit up to join cults. So clear my head on that. Where did you actually get the idea for the film?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is that in some ways it did come from my experience of moving to Los Angeles, but not from getting hit up to join cults. Particularly, I couldn't get anybody to answer my calls back then, including cults. But no, I moved to LA in my early 20s, and didn't know anybody here. It was kind of my first time living far from anybody I knew and living on my own. And I had come down here for film school, sort of chasing that dream as, millions of others do every year in LA. And I found it to be really kind of just a scary experience on an existential level in some way. I moved into an apartment complex that was pretty similar to the one that you see in the movie. And the whole experience was just really surreal. Like, I'd never experienced anything like that. I came from kind of a suburban background. And then, I went to college in a more densely sort of city type area. And to be in this kind of, it's hard to describe unless you've experienced it, but this kind of like beautiful courtyard apartment and you're sharing walls with all these people and you're waving to them on the breezeway and you don't know anything about them. And it never goes beyond a wave. Like nobody sort of got to know each other. It was not particularly neighborly. And there was just something very odd about that, just sort of wondering what was going on behind all these doors that were right around me. So that was what first got the wheels turning. And, there were little things that would happen, just weird noises that I heard in my apartment that caused me to not be able to sleep. And, you can see sort of echoes of that, especially in the beginning of the movie. But I think when it finally came together and felt like a movie was I sort of independently got really interested in cults when I moved down here. And that's because so many of them start in LA, from the Manson family to Synanon, which is probably the group that the movie is most closely based on, to the Source family. It seems to be kind of like a breeding ground for this type of thing. And I got really fascinated by it, as a lot of people are. I mean, they're fascinating sort of looks into human nature, right? Those two sort of thoughts, those two ideas kind of came together. And then I felt like, oh, that feels like a movie. And that's where the first draft came out of.
Yeah, I definitely think that Los Angeles is a great place to have it because just from the outsider view, I know like in middle America, they think of Los Angeles as, a bunch of Scientologists that live a completely different life than the normal average person does. So as soon as you kind of set yourself in Los Angeles, you go, okay, get ready for a certain mindset. I think that the apartment complex or what have you, that was a really cool place. I love the way it looked because there were times where it felt like a prison. Mm-hmm. And, for someone to go, wait a minute, someone's going to be trapped in an apartment complex. Come on. I'll remind you, there was a guy in Ohio who kept 3 women in a house for like 10 years.
Yeah.
So,
and NXIVM in New York, I think was based out of an apartment complex. I mean, they're like, these things happen. They happen right under our noses,
Yeah. And I most of the time when you think of cult movies, you think of, it's going to be set out in the middle of nowhere in some compound, Jonestown or what have you. But right. I thought the setting was a really good character of sorts in the film.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's funny because I think many of these groups actually start in more urban environments. It's kind of the end game when they go off and get their own compound, and right. That's always a bad sign, right? That's where like the mass suicide is going to happen.
Yeah. That's when they decide to move off to some other location and declare their own country.
Look out! It's not gonna end well.
Step 1, quit the cult. Step 2, buy stock in Kool-Aid.
Right, exactly.
So, speaking of cults, I know that there's certain scenes in the film that I thought of, I think I've seen a documentary with this exact line of dialogue in it. And so there's certain kinds of processes of the way that they break her down in order to get her to join the cult and certain methods and, like I said, lines of dialogue. Did you intentionally kind of cherry pick some aspects of actual cults?
Yes. Yeah. So there's sort of 2 things going on in the movie. There's the sort of psychological techniques are really pretty much all taken from real groups. They're sort of things that are directly out of Synanon. There are some the polygraph stuff is pretty much auditing from Scientology, and then there are the sort of more coercive techniques, the more physical techniques. And those are not from cults. Those are all based on things that the US government does, enhanced interrogation techniques, and as well as some things that the British government did during the Irish Troubles. So these are all, I made up hardly any of that stuff. That was all just stuff that people really do to other people, unfortunately.
That's not good.
No.
Having seen the film, that's not a good thing to hear.
No.
Let's be nice to each other, folks.
Yeah.
There's a couple, this is much more of a drama thriller than it is a straight horror. If someone's looking for jump scares every scene, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But the scenes that do hit, I think because of the character development and such, they hit harder. I'll give a little trigger warning as far as animals go. There's a little bit of a cute little animal, cute little cat gets in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a scene, I don't want to give away too much, but there's a scene that almost reminded me of Jesus's stigmata. I don't know if that was intentional, of like, hey, the stigmata and then the rebirth, that sort of thing.
I mean, that's certainly, you couldn't write that scene without that crossing your mind. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it's in some ways I viewed that as being part of their symbolism in some way, that, when you come out of that phase of things, not to hopefully give too much away, but when you come out of that phase of things, you're kind of reborn into the community. So yeah, there's certainly, I'm not trying to be overt, obviously, like the movie is not meant to be any kind of Christian allegory, but these things are sort of deeply in our cultural memories, and it felt appropriate.
Well, and I can see where an actual cult would simply steal aspects of Christianity to sell their idea.
Yes.
To me, that felt like something an actual cult would do.
Right.
Having no experience with cults myself, but
well, I'm thankful to hear that.
So apparently, if you start a cult, you can get Nicole Bryden Bloom to potentially join, which is exciting because she's amazing.
Yeah, she's fantastic.
I had never heard of her before. Can you tell me where you found her and how that came around? Because, like I said, I was not aware of who she was until then, and I'm like, wow, I need to keep an eye on what she does in the future.
Yeah, no, I didn't know her particularly either. She, this was her first lead role in a movie. She had done episodes of TV and so forth. So she was definitely an up and coming actor, and she did a lot of theater. She's based in New York and does a lot of theater.
And just not to interrupt, but
yeah.
Is there a single scene in this movie that she's not in? I've tried to.
Yeah, there are some brief moments where we're focused on Lisa.
Yeah. Gotcha.
But for the most part, no. Yeah, I remember telling everybody that going in, but specifically telling Nicole going in, like, just be ready because most of this movie is going to play on your face. Like the make or break for all of this is going to be you. Yeah. Not to put too much pressure on you, but she was totally unfazed by it. She's incredible. She put herself on tape. We sent out a casting call with some scenes, and they went out to the agencies, and she's with Gersh in New York, and Gersh were fantastic. They sent us a bunch of people. But she was one of the people who put herself on tape. And, as soon as I saw her audition, I kind of sat up because, I've done theater in the past as well. And with theater, you really are looking for just the strongest actor. You just want the strongest actor because you're 20 feet away from the audience. You can get an actor to play a different age, to play a different type. In film, you can't, especially with a movie like this, where we didn't have a lot of time, didn't have a lot of budget, you don't have time to be trying to force somebody's energy into a different energy, if that makes sense. And so, the first thing I saw was, oh, this person just feels like Sarah to me. And then, but there were other people who I felt that about as well. But then Nicole there were a couple things. One was that she was just so obviously smart. She had read the script, read the scenes that I'd sent, and understood them and interpreted them in a way that almost nobody else did. She was finding things that I hadn't thought of. And that always makes me sit up and go, okay. And I had specifically sent very difficult scenes, some of the harder scenes in the movie where there are a lot of sort of emotional layers going on. And it was all there, just even in the audition. And, so she was top of my list from the beginning, but we didn't actually cast her initially. We had an opportunity to cast kind of a bigger name TV actress who was starring in her own show. And, the producers felt that she would immediately, we were such a small movie that if we cast this person, it would immediately, put us in the black. It would immediately raise the profile of the movie. And I couldn't really argue with that. They were the ones putting up the money. And so, we went down the road with this other actress right up till about 4 days before we were supposed to start shooting. And then she abruptly dropped out with no explanation, and left us just, there were some moments there where we really thought we just were not going to be able to make the movie. Like it just wasn't going to happen. But, we regrouped and, called Nicole and said, we're starting in a few days. Do you think you could do this? And she jumped at it, and I will be forever grateful for that. I think she flew out the next day from New York. I got about 4 hours to rehearse with her on Sunday, and then we started shooting on Monday.
Well, I can understand from a producer's standpoint of you want a big name in there because that's immediately going to draw interest and all. I get that, but as a viewer, if there was a big recognizable star in that role, I'm not sure I would have been able to buy it as much as here's someone coming to Los Angeles who isn't secure and is, confused and alone. If the main character was a bigger star than everyone else in the film and was recognizable, I don't think that would have been able, I don't think as a viewer, I would have been as sold. So I
agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think ultimately you guys went with the right choice, and she killed it. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, that was the thing that we couldn't have known until she got here, was that she's an incredibly good person. She's just a wonderful person. She was so hardworking, and you've seen the movie, under such difficult circumstances and moving really fast. We shot in 15 days for the initial shoot, and she would just get to these places immediately on take one, on take two, and we couldn't have done it without her. I just think we couldn't have finished the movie.
Well, I wonder how much of that, hey, you have the role, get on a plane and get out here now, that kind of confusion. I wonder if she was able to use that.
I suppose that didn't hurt,
And in fact, in the film, her character is estranged from her family. I won't explain why. She's insecure in her professional life in that she just moved to town and she's hoping she can make it. And she doesn't have any friends. Believe me, I know all about not having any friends. So was all of that kind of intentional in putting that in to make her the perfect choice for a cult to recruit? Because at that point, you're just looking for friends. You're looking for a connection. Yeah.
I mean, all of those things that you picked up on everything, like those are all the things that make a person vulnerable to these groups. There are people who are searching for something, people who are insecure, people who are lonely. Those are the people who gravitate toward these groups and are easily victimized. So that was certainly part of it. It also was in some ways, again, that autobiographical, like all those sort of aspects of her personality came from how I felt when I first moved here. You move to LA, with big dreams and, I'm going to be somebody. And then you get here and you see the scale of it and how many people are already here, super smart, driven people, super talented people. And, it just is overwhelming. So that feeling came directly from my own experience, but it is also, it is in factually what these cults are looking for.
Right. Well, and that's one thing is all of the most talented people and all of the most beautiful women in every city and every town in the country, they all moved to LA.
Yes.
And suddenly, everyone around me is exactly in the same spot as I am.
Right,
so
right.
It's and maybe that's why the cults form.
I mean, I think like that's one reason why LA, I think it is a uniquely sort of isolating place, and a place where people come with sort of, big dreams that tend to not pan out all the time.
They're panning out for everyone involved in this film. I just want to say that.
Well, I really appreciate that.
So Some of the other characters, one thing that really kind of hit me, and I'm not gonna give away too much, but Miss Stanhope, I thought that was a perfect addition to the film because, and I won't give away the whole story arc with that, but it really connected with me of this is her mom.
Yeah.
It's obviously not her mom. It's a character she's never met before until she moves to LA, but it really felt like what a perfect way to indoctrinate someone, because in so many ways she took on that motherly figure.
Oh, yeah.
When creating the other characters to circle her, did you kind of say, yeah, I'm going to mess with her with this one and the guy down the hallway is a boyfriend potentially,
Right.
Did you kind of create them specifically to torture this girl?
It's funny. Yeah. In some ways, yes. The answer to that is yes. I think, the job of any writer is basically to torture your main character as much as possible. Like that's what you do in the course of a story. You find the triggers and you find the weaknesses and you push on them. But it's funny, I think it was a kind of an intuitive process for me. I started kind of figuring out who was in the complex, and part of it was just looking around the complex I was living at the time and seeing who was there. And there was kind of this ghostly waif-like old woman who would come out on her balcony in a dressing gown and smoke a cigarette on the balcony. And I never spoke to her, but I would just see her up there. And that was the initial seed for Miss Stanhope, was just wondering who this person is. But then as you go through the writing process and as you're rewriting and editing, you start to see the connections. And in fact, yeah, you hit on it exactly. Pretty much everybody in the movie, everybody in the community around her is a surrogate family member in some way. Jerry is a surrogate father, and Brian is like you say, a surrogate, boyfriend or partner, and Stanhope is definitely a surrogate mother. You mean the things that you find out about sort of Sarah's backstory with her mother, you understand why she reacts to Miss Stanhope the way she does. So yeah, that was all intentional, but not sort of pre-planned, if that makes sense.
Right. Well, you're just that darn good.
Honestly, it's about I'm not being afraid to do a whole lot of drafts, because you discover things with each draft. That's what happens to me anyway.
Right. So writers out there, don't think that what you wrote first was perfect.
Right.
See, we're learning here.
Yes,
it's a learning process.
Educational.
And I will say that he is starting his own cult. So if you guys want to learn more about writing,
yeah,
there you go. And so you mentioned that the shooting schedule was really tight. I understand that you guys blazed through this in a public place.
Yeah, so all the apartment exteriors. So whenever you see the breezeways, the pool, that trellis area, the front foyer, all that was in a real apartment complex that was full of residents. We couldn't afford to close down an apartment complex or anything like that. So we found this place up in Chatsworth, and for whatever reason, they were willing to let us shoot there for 4 days for a reasonable price. And, we had to kind of dodge around the residents. But a lot of the people who lived there were lovely in a way that I am not used to shooting in LA, where people tend to be really upset about film crews because they happen all the time. These people were really nice. They were very accommodating. A few of them actually appear in the movie as extras. They were just interested and wanted to kind of hang out. So yeah, the difficulties of it were, that it was unlike the complex in the movie. It was not a no pets complex, so there were barking dogs that were constantly we had to wait for, and it's a really big complex. So just getting from one end of it to the other would sometimes take it was almost like a company move. It would take a half hour just to get everybody from one end to the other. And then the trickiest part was that we didn't have access to any of the apartments. So we couldn't open any of the doors, and it's I don't want to sort of kill the magic, hopefully, but whenever you see Brian come out of his apartment, we had to do so much weird camera stuff to get that to look like he was actually coming out of the apartment. And you'll notice you never see his door open.
Huh. Well, I'm going to rewatch it, and and discover the magic.
It's all sound effects.
I was wondering about that actually, because, you can't throw a script in Los Angeles without hitting 4 actors. And I was wondering, when they set up in that apartment complex, were there people that were angry, were there like out of work actors that were angry that they weren't in the film?
Probably, but
so they ended up in the film. They ended up as extras, hanging out.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
No, it was a funny little place. It was kind of up in the valley, like a ways outside of LA proper. And I think, it seemed like it was kind of an older group of people living there. So I didn't get a vibe of like lots of, young, hungry actors there, but there probably were some sort of faded actors in there. I hope they weren't too angry.
I'm sure they enjoyed being a part of it as much as they were. So did you have, I guess coming out of this, I know that it kind of developed naturally. Is there a message you want people to have as they come out of this, or is this just a fictional story of something that happened?
I'd say like my first responsibility and the first thing that I would hope is just that people enjoy it. That it's entertaining, that they're not bored, that they feel like they got something out of it. Certainly for me, it's funny. I've had people. One of the things that I've really enjoyed as the movie has come out is having people interpret it in different ways, which I really love, that there's sort of enough ambiguity and enough sort of open-endedness in it that people see it differently, kind of depending on their own predilections. But, I've had people who are like really convinced that it's a political allegory. But for me, there is a metaphorical level to it, but really it's a personal one, which was just, to me, there's always been a bit of an internal conflict between being true to myself and feeling like I am a good citizen, and citizen in the largest sense, a member of a family, of a group of friends, of a country, of the world. And so, I've always felt tension there. Like, I don't think, you look at sort of on one political extreme, you have communism where there's not supposed to be any individual ownership and everybody is supposed to serve the state. And then, on the other end, you would have libertarianism or something along that line where, it's just, everybody doing for themselves. And I don't know that, and neither of those particularly appeals to me. But I've never sort of known where to land on a personal level. And so I think in a way I was kind of working that out for myself in this. And I don't have an answer, but that's sort of the tension that kind of drew me, I think, to the story as being more than just, a scary story.
Well, I like being able to watch a movie and figure out the answer myself and not be told, no, you have to think this about your film. Although on one hand, it makes me feel guilty because I've moved around a lot. Like as a child, we moved all the time. So I went to several different high schools even. And because I bounced around, I was always the new kid in school. And even now, I mean, I have moved from state to state and everything a lot. And so I don't know my next door neighbor's name.
Right.
So in one sense, I feel guilty, but then on the other sense, I actually feel good about that because I don't want them trying to get me into a cult.
Well, yes, so there's definitely advantages.
I have a feeling now that I've watched your film that the person next door is not someone I want to talk to, and I hope they don't listen to this podcast.
Yes,
I am not trying to go through what she goes through in this film. Let's just put it that way. Because
and now, like right now, we're literally all dangerous to each other, right? Like so yeah, it's probably good to stay away from your neighbors at the moment.
Yeah, don't talk to me. Don't cough on me.
Right.
I'm trying to not get corona.
Yes.
So just to kind of wrap up, what is next? I heard somewhere that you have a sci-fi project coming next. So obviously I am legally bound by podcast geek rules to ask you about that sci-fi project. I'm sure you're going to spill all of the details right here, right now.
Yep.
But if you can tell me something.
I can actually almost tell you nothing because so I'm making this movie with the same producers that did One Bedroom, Alok Mishra and Shane Forster. And they have basically told me, like, we don't want to tell anybody anything about this. They're very excited about it. I am too. This is a script that I've been working on for a long time, and I'm really excited about it. I can say that it is, I would call it grounded sci-fi. It's kind of a sci-fi thriller, I guess. But I probably can't say anything more about it. But I hope we'll get it done quickly, and then we can talk about it.
Well, grounded sci-fi is really, and I know some people listening to this may want to kill me or something. I'm not that much into like laser swords, and I mean, it's great, it's fun. I love watching that type of thing. Yeah. But I really loved the TV show that was just out, Tales from the Loop. Yeah, I thought that was great, and it was the sci-fi element was just kind of to kickstart the story of whatever it was they wanted to explore about a relationship or a family or what have you.
Yeah.
And
that's what I love about sci-fi as well.
Yeah. So I think that what you've done with this film of creating a character that we empathize with and care about, and then have to watch her go through what she goes through. I think that's, if you've got that same kind of a stew cooking for the sci-fi world, that's very exciting to hear. And to everyone listening, I tried. What more do you want from me? I tried to get the information. So I guess everyone who hasn't seen One Bedroom, check it out. And you won't be disappointed. I really, really enjoyed the film. You're going to discover a new star that you may not have ever heard of before in Nicole Bryden Bloom. Mm-hmm. She's amazing, and the film is great. And thank you for joining us to talk about it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So now I want to try to have a better understanding of cults. Why do people join them? Why do they stay? And the inner workings of the cults, and how do you escape it? So with me to discuss that now is Patrick Ryan, a cult mediation specialist. He's the founder and former head of TMX, the organization of ex-members of Transcendental Meditation. He's contributed to the Cult Observer, Recovery from Cults, and is the co-author of Ethical Standards for Thought Reform Consultants. So first of all, can you explain to me the difference between a cult and a religion? I've always heard that a religion is a cult plus time. And for a lot of people who are, religious, everything but their religion is a cult. There's certain religions that I guess are accepted religions that seem to have what I would think would be cult-like activity, which is like, not to bash, but a Scientology and stuff like that. Certain things that I've heard about it, it seems cultish. So can you explain to me what that difference is?
Yeah. So I understand. I've been in this field for 35 years. So this debate is a long-standing, discussion about how are we going to define cult. So what we've found is that groups, and I'll use that word instead of cult, groups are different from time to time and place to place. And people are different from time to place. And what we look at is the interaction of a particular person at a particular time in their life with a particular group at a particular place in its sort of life cycle. That interaction is what we look at in my work. And so some people can have a cultic relationship with a group, and another person in the same group could not have a cultic relationship with that group. So I think to illustrate it, the group I was involved in I was a follower of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and Transcendental Meditation. So most people who learn TM are not in a cult. They've probably spent way too much money to learn a technique. They've been lied to about its origins, and they've been lied to about a lot of things. Having been a teacher, I know we lied to people. We called it the sweet truth. So my mother learned TM. She wasn't in a cult, but I was in a level of TM that is more a rarefied area where I think I went to the Maharishi's University, and in the 5 years I was there, I spent 18 months in courses that were 1 month to 3 month long blocks of basically 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, where you really were discouraged from writing letters, calling home, contact with the outside world. You were assigned a buddy. So I was in that TM. I had a cultic relationship with it. And at the upper levels, that it's fostered. But most people don't. So similarly, I think with the Church of Scientology, there are those people who maybe take a course and they would technically be a Scientologist by the Scientology viewpoint, and they might get some benefit from it. And then there's cultic parts of, the people have cultic relationship with it, with the group. So people can have, in our worldview, sort of, you could have a cultic relationship with another person, a one-on-one. It's where one person sort of takes over your sort of volition and your agency. So these are complicated in some ways subjects, and some people like to make them very simple. Like one person that's written many books describes a cult as a group that has a pyramid structure. At the top is a living leader. At the bottom, there's lots of members. At every level of the pyramid, different levels of information are given out. What the person thinks they're joining is different than what the real teachings of the group are. The groups use techniques that impair critical thinking. So you can come up with definitions, but they're problematic.
Gotcha. You mentioned pyramid-like structure. One of my pet peeves is like multi-level marketing firms, or even like there are militia groups who are gathering guns because at some point they think they're going to have to fight the government to the death. Are these also pseudo-culty, or?
Well, they can be, certainly. I mean, I wouldn't disagree with you. I know that my colleague, Joe Kelly, had worked a lot with multi-level marketing groups, and there was a particular one that is very popular and one of the founding people who connected their families, in our government. There was 2 physicians who gave up their practices. One was a surgeon to sell these products. And, my colleague Joe Kelly was contacted by the wife of one of the doctors and said, my husband has invested our kids' college education. He's not making any money, and he's got this skill because he was sold on a dream of independence, and this dream that you could achieve your goals, that you didn't have to be, go through the drudgery of day-to-day work by starting your own business. And so in some multi-level marketing systems, there's a lot of deception about, first of all, they often don't tell you when you go to their first recruiting meeting that it has anything to do with the particular group or the particular product. They just talk about business opportunities, and then it's revealed to you. And those groups that are multi-level marketing, some of them, the upline, the people above you, can be very authoritarian. They can be abusive, and they can turn into often some multi-level marketing uplines are they're self-improvement programs where they're really not selling the product, vitamins, but they're really selling self-improvement.
You mentioned there was a guy that was a doctor. Yes. And everyone looks at doctors and say, these are people who have achieved a certain level. It's strange to think that they would join something like that, or even an actual cult. Because when you think about cults, the layperson like myself thinks, okay, this is someone who's lost in life and what have you. Are there specific types of people who are recruited? Why do people join, a doomsday or whatever cult?
Again, in the past, there was some studies that said that the average person, this is in the 70s, had 2.5 years of college, comes from a middle to upper middle class family, above average intelligence. There's that kind of research. I don't think that it describes the sort of the experience of many people at this point in our society. Groups, when people join groups, often you're dealing with abstract concepts. So someone who's not real bright, and I don't want to say it that way, but I guess I did, may have more difficulty dealing with abstract ideas. And so people who are intelligent, who are educated, if you do advanced math, that's not something that's concrete. It's not something you can put into bread box. These are concepts. You have to be sort of facile with ideas. The smarter you are in some ways, I think you have more vulnerability because you can deal with abstract concepts. So what groups, as we look at them, do is frequently they get people to change their sort of fundamental assumption of how the universe functions, if we're talking about a spiritual group. Or they change the fundamental assumption of how our political system works. Or we change the fundamental assumption of how maybe business works. So I came from an Irish Catholic family, so there's this, fundamental assumption I was raised with is there's God, and then there's Jesus, and Jesus' mother was a virgin, and somehow the Holy Spirit came and did this, and he was born, and somehow he got crucified, and that somehow atoned for something that Adam and Eve had done. And if you do what you're supposed to, you go to heaven, and if you don't, you go to hell, except the nuns taught us there's these in-between places. All right, so that's a fundamental assumption of how the universe works. So at the end of the day, you either go to heaven or hell, and it's going to be a lovely place to go or not so lovely place to go. If you can get someone to change their fundamental assumption about how the universe works, that you have let's say a reincarnation group, that may be an Indian group, that there's 3.5 billion lifetimes you go through in different types of bodies, and this existence that we're in is just one more. But there are people that can achieve this purity where they are God just on earth. And so if you can change someone's fundamental assumption that that's how the universe works, then the smart person fills in all the rationalizations themselves. All you need to do is give them a little shove, and they will then do the rationalizations. Because we're talking about beliefs; these are not things that are tangible.
I've heard about, obviously not everyone, but certain members of even like ISIS, in order to understand the concept of a galactic war that will, that will take over the world and all that there's a certain level of education that would have to be in their heads. So go ahead.
No. I mean, I think there's, again, with ISIS, there's going to be different levels. There are going to be those people that you described, and I'm guessing, when those guys flew into the World Trade Center, I'm thinking, okay, what would it take, for me to do that? Well, I'd have to have some kind of mental construct that I could adhere to, that would in some way push away the ramifications of this action. I would have to believe in something. So I'd have a lot of steps. And then there's those, people that are grown up in Palestine or in some other place that is, in poverty, and the people around them, they feel killed their brother or their sister, and they get angry and they want vengeance. Right. So you can have, I think the thing with cults is that there's a whole variety of experiences, and we want to make there's a lot of grays, a lot of shades, and I think as humans want things that are clear boundaries. And so I don't think it's one or the other. I did a workshop with my colleague for the European Union on an organization they have called Exit. And it's to deal with de-radicalization. So what happens is, in essence, when people come back from Syria, This is a little exaggeration, but to illustrate it, they come back from Syria. They know they're going to go to jail. What do the European countries do with them? They're going to go to jail. It's not like here we're going to send them to Guantanamo. They're going to go to jail for some period of time. And then when they're done being in jail, they're going to come out. So how do you sort of de-radicalize them? What's that process? And each sort of European Union country had its own approach to doing it because they're different cultures. And they also brought to the de-radicalization process their own cultural biases. And we all come from different perspectives. We all come from different cultures, even within the United States. Like I came from this Irish Catholic culture. It's got its own rules and ethics and mores. That's sort of imprinted upon me. And so I look at the world, no matter how much I try to get the nuns out of my head, I look through the world through some kind of lens. And so my approach to interacting with someone would be to de-radicalize them or to approach them would be different than somebody from a different country. So I think that what we have to look at is that there are a lot of different versions of these groups. So for simplicity, I would say if there's 1,000 members of ISIS, then there's 1,000 different ISISes.
Sure.
As much as there are obvious similarities, but what we need to do, I think, is look at the differences, because it's in the differences that we can facilitate change.
So in the movie that we were discussing earlier, One Bedroom or One BR, they use a torture system to kind of indoctrinate people into their way of thinking. Mm-hmm. When it comes to that kind of cult, the dark sides of cults that we hear on the news from time to time, mm-hmm. How many of those are active, and what are some of the methods that they would use to break someone's will?
I think that there's probably a lot less of that than groups that you might call cultic that don't use torture and don't use those things. So that more describes when there's torture involved, classic brainwashing, and we would probably be looking at the works of Robert J. Lifton, who studied the prisoners of war who came home from Korea, and people who were put in environments where there was torture. And in essence, there was a gun to their head, a metaphorical gun or a physical gun, that said that either you believe or you die. So it's either you're with us or we'll dispense with your existence. So
I'm with them.
Go ahead.
I'm with them. If it comes down to it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then what we find, or I think research indicates, is that when that gun is removed, not very many people stay with the system, because that sort of ideological totalism that is being imposed has that element of torture, or that element of their existence being dispensed. Groups can do this, achieve the same thing of getting allegiance by a lot more subtle ways. Disguised techniques of hypnosis, getting people in states of reverie, like your football team gets a field goal, everybody's standing up, they're all cheering, and you're all in reverie. Those are times when our critical thinking is sort of slackened off, and people are more susceptible to suggestions or ideas. People entering into certain contexts. So if the context that you enter into, I'm trying to think of exactly the way to explain it. So we'll use the near-death experience to explain the sort of idea of context. So if you're raised as a Catholic, when you study people who have near-death experiences and they're Catholic, then maybe Mary or Jesus comes to them. But if somebody that's raised a Hindu in India, when they have a near-death experience, Mary and Jesus don't pop in. It might be Shiva, it might be Lakshmi, it's somebody else. Same with somebody maybe who's raised in Islam. The visions are different because they're context dependent, the environment that you're in. So the context that people have these sort of learning experiences that are tied to impairing people's critical thinking will change people. So I think that you can get people, well, I think we know we can get people to do things that they wouldn't normally do because of a context. So maybe I'm not a violent person and I don't get in fights and I don't shoot people. But if somebody came and they killed my mother, another side of me might come out. And I might be much more defensive of that. So if the context is saving my family's life, well, I might do things that I wouldn't do in a normal context. So if you can create an environment for someone where they have that kind of experience, where like experience, not really that your mother's being killed, but like that, then people can do things that they wouldn't normally do in everyday life. But it's not limited to cults. It's across the human experience. In certain contexts, we do and behave in ways that we don't in other contexts.
Sure. So when you guys talk of brainwashing, mind control, you're not talking about the way we see in sci-fi movies.
No.
Of you are under my spell or something like that.
No.
You're talking about a subtle manipulation of the way people are thinking.
We exactly. We're talking about getting people to change, first of all, their fundamental assumptions of how the universe works. That Pat's God, there is no God, whatever it is, get people to do that. And then give them experiences that validate those fundamental assumptions. So you create a context that says, I don't know, God is gold. and when you look at God, his skin is gold. Okay. So then you have somebody who has learned, who's a member of a group, that God, when he returns, is going to be gold and his skin will be gold, looking, golden light. So then if you put someone into a suggestible state of mind through maybe putting the person into trance, which is done by rhythmic drumming, chanting, meditation, guided imagery, lots of ways of getting people into this. Trance doesn't mean you don't know what's going on. It just means really focused awareness. So if you get people into those states, then they may experience a person sitting on a chair as having golden light radiating from them. And then the theory that God returns as golden light, this assumption, and then the internal experience, this hallucination, so to speak, of seeing them the way they lock in, and then you have this powerful cocktail of change. So giving people experiences is something that we all have, So you walk into a bar, you see a lady that's, attractive, your hormones start going, and you have feelings. And those feelings are not intellectual, they're emotions. They bypass sort of intellectual. I mean, you could think about it, all the processes, but usually it's a feeling state. So what groups are good at doing successful groups is to induce experiences in people that bind them, like falling in love. But in this case, it might be falling in love with an idea or a teacher. And it's a sort of maybe a different type of love, maybe not a romantic love, but love is not rational.
No, it's not. So I'm not talking about that from experience. So what about the leaders of these groups? You're Jim Jones, who I understand that a lot of people were shot, but I guess some people willingly drank the cocktail. Or a Manson who can get people to kill. Is there a certain charisma, or what is it about these people that can get people to do, I mean, for lack of a better term, crazy things?
Yeah. So just to on the Jim Jones piece, I think the majority of the people, I don't know the number, I have the research, but it's a huge number of those people were either shot or forced to take the poison.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I mean, I think there was 930 some people that died, and it may have been over 800 people were forced. So
gotcha. Yeah, there's a movie called The Sacrament that is kind of a retelling of that. But
yeah, so the leaders can be charismatic, certainly, and charisma is something that's not tangible. Frequently, leaders also, some can not be charismatic, just as long as their lieutenants are. Their lieutenants can recruit and tell you how wonderful this leader is. But some of them are psychopaths that basically their needs are what your needs are not, or your person is not a consideration for them. It's what their needs are. And so that's how they live. I mean, so there are people who are just not good people. And in our society, there are people, and we lock them up. We put them away. But we live in a country, and there's many countries that have freedom of religion, the freedom of, we can express any idea we want, no matter how strange it is. It's only when we act upon it that there's a problem. And so Jim Jones, for example, Rosalynn Carter campaigned with him. Willie Brown said he was one of the greatest men. All these political people aligned themselves with him when he was in San Francisco because of the good works that he was doing. And you couldn't do a lot of things. I think he was even on the election commission, if I'm not mistaken. You couldn't do a lot of things in San Francisco politically without Jim Jones's support. He was, he had the political side to it. Now, he also had another side to him. And when that started manifesting, I guess that could be debatable. But certainly, as there's that expression, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He moved in a more narcissistic, megalomaniac way, and with him came followers. And those who didn't go along with it, sometimes were beaten, and bad things were done to them. And when families, there's some evidence that when families wanted to leave, and when they created this, the place in Guyana, he had all the kids of the group go down to go to our camp, and they went to the camp, but they weren't allowed out. So their parents had to come down to get them. And then they didn't get to leave. So I think that it's a slippery slope. There are those crazy people that are megalomaniacs, and they do these bad things. And then there are people who are just self-centered and narcissistic, and they want people to believe what they have to say. And there are people that, for example, have hallucinations, and if you start hallucinating, people say you're crazy. But if I can get you to have the same hallucinations that I have, then I'm not crazy, because we have a shared experience. So I think there's it's difficult because we want to put it in a basket of one thing or another, and so I think that there's a lot of different versions of these abusive people, and it manifests in relationships, and we can see abusive relationships where a husband may be using the Bible to say that he has authority over his wife, and she has to do what he says. If she doesn't do what he says, then there's a problem. And it, from a liberal Philadelphia point of view, that would be abuse. But within those cultures and religious systems, not abuse. I mean, it's abuse either way you go, but it's not viewed as abuse. It's viewed as doing what God wants me to do, which is be submissive to my husband.
Right.
He has to be the head. Yeah.
And I think that, was it Heaven's Gate or something, where everybody, Hail Bob Comet was coming so they can kill themselves. And I guess everyone involved with that, I mean, including the leader, has to actually believe that, right? I mean, they're not lying, right? Or
I believe, and so we're going from what research says to my beliefs. My beliefs are that, and then from experience, that everyone in groups have doubts all the time. And so what groups are good at doing is getting you to sublimate those doubts. They give you strategies not to dwell on the doubts. So the strategies can be, a mental technique or a hypnotic technique or some busy activity or some theological reason that when you start having doubts about it, you go back to those ideas. And then there are the true believers. So I don't think that everyone that went up into the spaceship that committed suicide was 100% sold out. I'm sure that there were a lot of people who had doubts. But sometimes the structure of some groups is that you become so isolated from your family, from your previous identity, that there doesn't seem to be a way to connect back to that. And so in my work, especially, what I try to do is to teach families is how to connect back to, how to make a smooth path for the person to come back to, have something on the outside. Because when you don't have that and you're in a closed system, then you could come to the view that it's either I stay with a group or I don't exist, because I have nowhere else to come to. I have nothing. And so some people stay in these systems to protect their investment. You've been doing this for 25 years. It's got to be true. But what if it's not? Then what does that mean? Yeah. And think about that in terms of marriages or, relationships. People are in relationships and then they find out something about their partner that they didn't know. And they're like, what happened? Why didn't I see that? But they might continue with it because they're protecting their investment. And then we have that in our politics. We have it in politics all the time. And we know from research on leaders tend to lie, of all persuasions. They're persuasive things. But, then they kick into this sort of, people kick into tribal qualities, and tribe takes over. And I think that's something we probably all experience, because our family is like a tribe, or our neighborhood's a tribe, our political party's a tribe, our church is a tribe. And when our tribe gets attacked, or we feel it's being attacked, we sometimes don't think about the bad parts of what our family has done, or our neighbors have done, or our community has done. We don't think about that. We think about our tribes being attacked.
Gotcha. So there's a really great cult movie called Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, about a lady who leaves the cult and has those leftover impact, PTSD, whatever you want to call it. Can you get into a little bit about, for those who successfully leave a cult, what is, obviously it's different for every person, but is there that lasting effect of like the lingering thoughts of the cult?
So the research indicates that about 1 million people join and leave groups in North America every year. And about 90% of the people who join a group leave on their own. It's just a matter of when. Could be for the first day, could be 50 years, but most people leave on their own. So with that in mind, depending upon what the person's experience in the group is, it's easier or less easy to leave. So if you join a group and you learn to meditate, and then it's a cult, and you buy into it, and you're 18 years old, and when you're 19, then there's something else that comes along, and you leave that group, and probably not going to have long. You fall in love, or something else takes over, and your life moves on. There are people who maybe their families in the group, and when they leave the group, they're cut off from their children. So they have the choice of I can leave, but if I leave, I never can talk to my kids again. So that certainly may, for that person who has to have left their family behind, and their family has completely cut them off, well, I don't think they probably let go of those feelings really quickly. Different people respond to the same group differently. And it's always amazing to me to see people that are in horribly abusive situations that, they have this ability to move on. Some people, they don't, and they have the lingering effects of the group. And if you think about it, I go back to this sort of falling in love marriage analogy. There are people who fall in love, they get married, they have kids, then they decide that they don't like the person. This happens about 50% of marriages, and they move on. They go on to a next life. Now, we all have friends that fall into that category, and then some of those of our friends who fall into that category that they've divorced hang on and really are still complaining and bitching about what a horrible person that spouse was. And 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, they're still traumatized, or they still have this anger about what happened to them. Other people, they don't have that experience. So I think that it might be helpful to look at groups in that same way. So in our work, and I was affiliated with the International Cultic Studies Association, and in our cult sort of recovery work, what we're focused on are those people that have had difficulties, have been ostracized, have the PTSD, have those experiences. So the sort of sampling of people that I would run into are the people that you are sort of describing. But I don't want to minimize that not everybody has that experience. I mean, as humans, we're resilient. You know, I went to Catholic school for 9 months, and it was for me, it was a traumatizing experience. You know, other people went through the same traumatizing experience, and it wasn't traumatizing to them. You know, the nuns were horrible. So it's just everyone has a different sort of reaction to these our life's experience, and I think that if we look at it that way, the way I'm trying to paint is that to help people see that being affiliated with these groups is something that can happen to anyone given the right circumstances, because the mechanisms aren't much different than the mechanisms that we have in our own lives about how we adopt beliefs, how we adopt cultures, how we separate from cultures, how we change, the influence that our social groups have on us, our political groups. I mean, it's the nature of sort of the human condition. But you know, there are bad groups, or there are bad people who get people to do bad things, and there's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, even like you mentioned before with a sporting group, you know, like a football team, your favorite football team can commit a penalty and you don't see it. You just,
You don't.
You know, why would the ref call that? So tell me about the work that you do in cult mediation.
Sure.
A family would come to you and talk about say someone in their family is in a cult and they want to get them out, or do you deal with them after the fact? Or
well, and all of those, everything you've described. So if we could take, you know, I mean, because I look at every situation as unique and don't lump things together. So, but to illustrate, so somebody joins a group that their family doesn't like, and thinks that the group has a bad history and that there could be potential harm. So, if my child decides they were going to join ISIS, I'd probably, you know, be crazy because ISIS has this history.
Sure.
So, what I would want to do is the first thing we would do is to have the parents fill out very lengthy intake forms, so that we can understand the nature of that child, a person, an adult, or whoever it is joining the group. What's their history like? There's what background did they come from? Were they the kind of person who, you know, in 10th grade they were obsessed with soccer, and in 11th grade it was violin, and in 12th grade it was speaking French? Are they the kind of person that gets totally absorbed in something and then they drop it and go on to something else to drop it? Or are they the kind of person who picks up and just stays with the one thing? They become obsessed. Might give us some insight into what their connection is going to be to the group. So is my child just reading ISIS material because they're curious, or because they're doing a research project for school, or because they think the ideas are interesting, or they are disenfranchised by their friends and society, and they see injustice in the world, and they think that these ideas are meaningful to them? It answers some of those ideas. So we want to sort that out. What category it is it in? Because if the research is correct that about 90% of the people who join groups leave, then what we want to do is create an environment where it's easy for someone to leave. So when I believe that if you're a parent and you're having conflict with your loved one, and as long as you're in conflict with them and they're in a group, they don't have to think about their own things that they don't like about the group, because they've got an enemy. They have the enemy, right?
Which is, I guess, I'm assuming why they want to drive a wedge between you and family.
Well, I think that it's sort of a chicken and the egg kind of thing, but a family's reactions to someone adopting a new belief, family's reactions to their daughter or their son falling in love with somebody they don't like, that comes from the wrong side of the tracks, that doesn't fit into their cultural milieu, or any of those things. They're the wrong political party. Any of those kinds of things, it makes it, the person doesn't have to think about the ideas and the things that they're doing. They do, but they don't have to when you have this enemy. So if we look in politics today, as long as we can talk about how horrible the Democrats are if we're a Republican, or we can talk about how bad the Republicans are if we're a Democrat, because we don't have to think about the nuance. What we can do is have something to focus our attention on that's not the uncomfortable feelings that we have within ourselves. So in helping a family, first we want to identify, learn about the person, sort of what their makeup is. We want a psychologist to review what is known about the person. Does there seem to be, a history of mental illness? We want to sort those out. Drug usage, we want to sort those out. We want to find out what the vulnerabilities would be for a person coming back into the home, coming back to their family, reconnecting. And so then our work is about trying to help families create that sort of safe space for someone to come out to, that they're not going to get their finger wagged at them, that I told you so. They're not going to be ashamed that they wasted X amount of years. They could have been a doctor and they're not a doctor. All of those things that leak out. We work with families on trying to address those things. And so most families want to tell their children what's wrong with the group they're involved in. And I personally believe that if you are a half-decent parent, your child knows what you think about things. You don't have to ask them. You don't have to tell them. And then the example I use is when my mother was alive, when the telephone would ring, I could tell by the way that ringer rang, certainly by the first sound of her breath, how the conversation was going to go, because I knew my mother. So you know. So kids know what their parents think about. They know what their goals are for their kids, or if they're disappointed, not disappointed. You don't have to emphasize those things. In a way, we try to encourage people to do the opposite, to find those things that they have in common, that they can agree with what the child is trying to do. So when I was, TM trying to teach, one of the people I wanted to teach was my father. And my father grew up, his parents, my grandparents, met at the University of Minnesota in 1900 and homesteaded a farm in South Dakota. My dad grew up on a farm. He became the highest ranking enlisted man in the U.S. Navy. This is somebody that comes from a very different worldview. And he has a nice, son who knows what the world is about. He knows how the universe functions because he's learned it from the Maharishi, and he wants his father to say, I want to save my father's soul. And so, I'm using my father as a model of how he interacted with me. When I would come home, there was not criticism of what I was doing. There was a focus on the good parts that they could agree with. They listened. And I don't know how he listened to my crazy ranting of the gods and energy and all of these things, because it's just not his worldview. And when I would finally get to the point of saying, Dad, why don't you learn to meditate? And he would always come back to something along the lines of, son, you love meditating. And what I love doing is riding horses. And if I had that extra 20 minutes a day, I'd go ride a horse, because that's what I love doing. But you love doing this, meditating. And so I want you to be happy. And so he found ways of staying connected without invalidating me.
Gotcha.
Which makes an easy glide path to come back out to. And so in that called mediation process or intervention process, a lot of our work, certainly there's work with counseling a person and what to talk to them about, but a lot of it is, first of all, creating that safe space to come to. Because we all have, we go to some friend's house and it's great. You go to other friend's house and it's tension. Which one do you want to go to? If every time you interact with somebody, they're giving you a hard time or trying to sell you something, or you don't want to be around them. So how can we get families to find that place in themselves where they can at least model respect, no matter how bizarre it is, and model that they've made errors in their lives without saying that. Friends tell you, hey, this is a good stock. Well, you might not check it out, all the details by the stock, you might invest in it. This is a good real estate deal. You might buy the property, and you haven't done the potential research you could do. And so we all take ideas. So being able to, model for your loved one who's potentially being manipulated, mistakes that you've made, and without a lot of judgment, I think that's the basis of that creates the basis. So to facilitate change or to do an intervention, you have to have a relationship with the person. And so to facilitate change, relationship is required. So a lot of what my work is about teaching people to have relationships with people who believe things or think things or do things that are so abhorrent to that person. And so that's, I think, a big part of it, and being comfortable. Look, so many groups that I deal with are groups that I just think are absolutely, insane what they do.
As much as I want to ask you to name them, I won't. But go ahead.
Because I won't give you the name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I'm not there's people who are cult fighters, so to speak, and with all the caveats of the word cult that we've talked about earlier.
Sure.
And their idea is to fight the group. And, they put their attention on that, getting back at families trying to invalidate. Well, the reality is, in my 35 years in this field, a handful of group leaders have been shut down. And even those who have been shut down, they still have followers.
Even like you mentioned, if you're saying to your daughter, you will not see that boy anymore.
Yeah.
Well, suddenly that boy looks really great to that daughter.
Yes.
and so I definitely see the advantage of, I know your instinct is to tell them how foolish they've been and how,
right,
they've made a big mistake because they no longer believe in what you believe in or whatever, but don't come from a place of antagonism or whatever.
Yeah.
Come
from a place of respect.
Yeah. And I can also see where fighting that urge is something that you would have to instill in them.
Absolutely. What I ask families to do, if my child did that, I'd be bat raving crazy. I'd be doing everything I would tell them not to do, because those are the instincts.
Right.
So people engage like me because, in my experience of 35 years of doing this is what I find is successful. And I think that the research backs up. This is what is helpful. And fundamentally, it is, how do you stay connected to somebody you disagree with? I had a sister who was married to a guy that my father really did not like. And when he would walk in the room, the veins would come out on his forehead. He just did not like this person. I knew it, and everybody knew it. But he was respectful, kind, treated him like everyone else. But he had his feelings about the person. And so, because if he didn't do that, he wouldn't have a connection with my sister.
Right.
And so when it got really bad, my father was a safe place to come to for my sister. And so I really think it's really important for people in family systems to find somebody. It doesn't have to be a family member, somebody that can play that role of being that lifeline, that anchor, that beachhead on the outside. And I think it makes it easier for people to leave.
And also, if you're saying there's this Xenu guy and Thetans or whatever, and that's all crazy. Well, it's pretty out there that God took human form and then died for our sins too. So
yeah. These are beliefs. These are beliefs. They're beliefs, and beliefs are not necessarily rational.
So let's say, just to wrap things up, let's say that someone has a family member who is in a cult, or they believe that it's a bad situation, and they want to help facilitate the exit from that, what would the steps be that they would take to get a hold of you or what have you?
So we have a number of websites: Cult Mediation, Cult Intervention 101. There's the International Cultic Studies Association. Their website is icsahome.com. And so that's one of the largest academically oriented organizations in this field and in recovery. So I would encourage families to reach out. We're always glad to speak with families and sort of give them an assessment of what we think. I think our goal is not to do interventions and not to do mediations, to create an environment where they're not necessary. But although we do them, that's the last resort, because it's time consuming, it's costly, it involves a lot of work. But can you create that environment for the person to come out to? So I would, you can reach out to us at cultmediation.com or Cult Intervention 101, intervention101.com, the International Cultic Studies Association. I think that one thing that we want to caution families for doing is when you go on the web and you look up and find out information about a group, and then you think that this information is bad and your children should understand it. Most good manipulators already know what that information is out there and have answers for them. And what you're doing when you bring that negative information to your loved one is you're telling them, I don't like this group, and you're giving them the playbook to hang you with, or you're giving them the rope, because a good manipulator then goes, okay, your parents think this, and now I want to help maybe facilitate you not being around your parents, or that information that your parents are giving you, you now have a deeper understanding of it. Because when you read stuff on the net, if you're a parent, it just looks bad. You haven't done all the back work, reading the footnotes and knowing the context of the people who are saying those things. A group leader just has to say, oh, Mary, who said that about me, you know what she is. She's inhabited by beings from another planet. And they go, oh, that's it. So whatever Mary says, it's not valid. So I think that there's value in information, but the real value is in understanding the information and understanding the impact of the information. Information alone can cause problems. One has to understand it, and learning and understanding takes time and it takes effort on the family side. And so if you're interfering with someone's life without their permission, and that's what you really are doing when you dislike what they're involved in, you're interfering with someone's life, and they're not asking you to do it, then you should really understand why you're doing it, how you're doing it. You should ask yourself those questions, and there's some ethical questions you should ask yourself before you interfere with someone's life, because you can get someone to leave a group, but then what happens? Are you going to be there on the other side to catch them? Or what is that environment that they're going to come back into? Is it going to be a good environment, or is it going to be worse than the group? So those are the things that I think that families should look at. And what we try to do is through either, working with families on Skype or Zoom, or doing workshops that we do regularly around the country and around the world, so that families can come. We do series. We just completed a 30-day series, 30 webinars, sometimes twice a day. There was during this COVID period when people were sort of locked down. So there's a lot of places that you can get for free to learn about these things and get the experience of other people. But ultimately, whatever decisions families make, they have to be comfortable with. It has to fit for them. It has to feel right to them. It has to fit within their sort of ethical codes, their morals, their religious ideas of who they are, their family system, their culture. Whatever suggestions that are made or they come across, it's got to be comfortable to them, because in the end, the family is going to pay the cost of having a relationship with their loved one or not. And that's the most important thing, is to have a relationship, because for me, relationships are more important than beliefs.
Yep. Yeah. What a great way to end it. You said earlier that, leaders lie. Well, you're a great leader in this field, and I think you've been pretty honest with us today. I thank you so much for your information, and hopefully that has helped some people with the idea of don't rush into things.
Yes.
Get educated and actually go to someone who understands the nuances of what's going on. So thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome. Have a great day.
And that is our show. I'd like to thank my guests, 1BR writer-director David Marmor and cult mediation specialist Patrick Ryan. And of course, thank all of you for listening. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And remember, like any great franchise, your story isn't over yet.